relation, and this approach can be termed as the alliance approach to understanding kinship. We can begin with, if we look into kind of what means alliance, it refers to repetition of intermarriage between larger or smaller group. The concept of marriage alliance was developed by Lévi-Strauss to deal with specifically with society which practice cross-cousin marriage. And here we kind of because we go into kind of cross-cousin marriage and understand intergroup marriage, it is very important to understand the theory that Lévi-Strauss has given us, and in that he is kind of taking our attention away from descent and focusing more on marriage. And marriage was understood by Lévi-Strauss as a system of exchange and communication. So it was kind of a understanding where it was not an individual relation between a man and a woman, but it was at a level of group that he was kind of focusing his attention. So we can kind of understand marriage as a matrix of kinship and social order. Marriage was seen as fundamental two kinds of kin, which I kind of understand relation is one is a consanguineal kin and the other is a affinal kin. The consanguineal kin are kin who are related through blood relation. So father and his son is a consanguineal relation, whereas affinal kin are kin who are related through marriage. That is mother-in-law, daughter-in-law or sisters-in-law are a affinal kin. So there was a clear kind of an opposition between consanguinity and affinity. In the course of marriage transaction, women serves as the vector via which social alliance are established. So women were seen as a medium through which kind of a structure could be established by kind of women being given from one group to the other. According to Lévi-Strauss, kinship marks the overcoming of the state of nature and kind of imposition of the cultural order by human. So in his argument on nature and culture, Lévi-Strauss argues that human being is both social and biological. But the fact that makes human being different from the animals are the command over language, and most importantly the rule of kind of a universal rule which he calls as incest avoidance, which kind of seen as a threshold of nature and culture. Lévi-Strauss argues that incest avoidance actually leads to the transformation of human being from a state of nature to a state of culture, and therefore he says that incest taboo, which is kind of both nature and culture, because nature is something which is universal, nature is something which is kind of prevalent and accepted by everybody. So incest avoidance is also a rule which is universally found in every society, and incest taboo is basically the rule which kinds of prohibits sexual relation among certain members. The members of an elementary family who are sharing the same blood are prohibited from having sexual marriage, and therefore there is a kind of a rule which is culturally specific. So certain members in a society are kind of prohibited marriage partner, and then there is a kind of a preferential marriage partner. So Lévi-Strauss talks about marriage rule which is culturally specific, and he says that they kind of regulate society. The basic features of alliance approach are that it holds the principle of kinship in the incest taboo. Incest taboo is a near universal rule that one marries outside of a closed category of relatives. The twin principle of reciprocity and incest led to marriage alliance through exchange of women. Now, Lévi-Strauss is kind of giving us a very systematic understanding. He is saying that since members of an elementary family cannot have sexual relations, they are prohibited marriage partner. So we look out of our own immediate blood relative for marriage partners, and this rule of looking for marriage partner outside the immediate group is called exogamy. And this is kind of also based on a reciprocal relation according to Lévi-Strauss, that if I kind of seek a women from outside group, that same group will reciprocate by giving a women. So there is an exchange of women between the two group, and this is what he called as alliance. So what is very significant to Lévi-Strauss theory is exchange and reciprocity. According to Lévi-Strauss, forms of marriage are but specific aspect of systems of the exchange of women between groups which creates perpetual alliance between them. So, based on the rules of marriage, which is prohibited marriage partners and the prescribed marriage partner, exchange will take place between two or more groups. He considered the exchange of women as primary form of exchange which precedes symbolic exchange of gift. So, Lévi-Strauss is saying that even before we started exchanging gifts among society, the exchange of women was existing. Exchange of gift was a medium for transition from animal world of nature to the human world of culture. Incest, the next significant concept is incest taboo. According to Lévi-Strauss, alliance theory is based on incest taboo and the prohibition of incest is recognized universally. It is viewed as fundamental conditions of human social life. A man is not allowed to make a woman his wife who is immediate kin, and in fact he has to give her away to another man. It is this prohibition of incest that had led two groups to follow exogamy. The opposition between consanguinity and affinity becomes the basis of kinship system. So, consanguinity are your blood relation, or in other words, prohibited marriage partner, and affinity are your kind of marriage partners, or they are prescribed marriage partner. So, there is a kind, you cannot look for a marriage partner among your consanguine. So, this opposition forms the base of alliance theory. The process of incest taboo, where a daughter or a sister is sent to a different family, commences a circle of exchange of women. So, we will see how there are different kinds of exchange of women depending on the number of group. So, if there is a kind of a two group, it gets settled, or it is kind of a direct exchange. If there are three or more group, then it is a delayed reciprocity. Lévi-Strauss' views on marriage is primarily a process of exchange between one man and the other man, or between one domestic group and the other. The main notion of alliance theory is an reciprocal exchange which creates affinity. So, the exchange of women from one group to other creates an alliance, that is a relation between two groups, and that kind of is the base for understanding how marriage regulated society. Now, in his work, Elementary Structure of Kinship, Lévi-Strauss gives us two kinds of structures of kinship. The first he calls as an elementary structure of kinship. The elementary structure of kinship refers to positive marriage rule which prescribes marriage partner. This is that who are the individuals with whom a person can marry, and it's a kind of if we look into a kind of an understanding within it, there are two kinds of cousin. One is a parallel cousin, the other is a cross cousin. Parallel cousins are children of the same sex sibling, that is mother, her sister. So, mother's sister is a parallel cousin, and a cross cousin are children of opposite sex sibling. So, father and his sister, father's sister's children is a cross cousin. Now, parallel cousins, since they are kind of the same sibling, it is considered to be a prohibited marriage partner, whereas cross cousin, in which the sex of the parents changes, kind of becomes a preferred marriage partner. So, cross cousin marriage in the Dravidian kinship structure was kind of considered as the core for understanding alliance theory. The second structure which Lévi-Strauss talks about is the complex structure, where he is talking about the negative marriage rules which was people are prohibited from marrying. So, the elementary structure is the marriage rules which prescribes, that is the cross cousin are the preferential marriage partner. Complex structure of kinship tells us that there are certain members who are prohibited. So, parallel cousins are prohibited from marriage rule. Elementary structure is basically a positive marriage rule, and complex structure focuses on negative marriage rule. Lévi-Strauss' discussion is, however, more focused on the elementary structures of kinship, because his objective was to understand cross cousin marriage as it exists in certain part of the country. The group of possible spouses for the women has to be from outside ego's own group, including member in the nuclear family and parallel cousin. Following rules of incest avoidance, marriage partners are from outside the group, which is a rule of exogamy. Lévi-Strauss tells us about two forms of reciprocity. In his work Elementary Structure, he is saying that there can be two forms of exchange of women. The first, he is calling it as restricted reciprocity. Two kin group other than the family supplies each other marriage partner. In other words, we can say there are two groups, clan A, clan B. So, there is a kind of exchange of women within the two groups. That is, women from clan A would marry the man from clan B, and in return the women from clan B will marry the man of clan A. So, there is a immediate reciprocity, that is, exchange takes place immediately, and it is establishes a relation of reciprocal immediate exchange. The second form of reciprocity which Lévi-Strauss talks about is generalized reciprocity. Here the exchange of women would take place between three or more groups, but in kind of one direction. Here he calls it as delayed and indirect exchange, because in this a group A will give women to group B, the group B will give women to group C, and group C in return will give it to A. So, the reciprocity is not kind of done at the same level, but at another level, that is another generation, and therefore Lévi-Strauss calls it as delayed and indirect. He also uses the concept of harmonic and disharmonic exchange. According to Lévi-Strauss, if all transmission between these features, that is two groups are exchanging, are taking place in one direction, then it is harmonic. While if it is taking place in alternate direction, that is in one generation it is patrilineal, and in the second generation it is matrilineal, then it is kind of considered as disharmonic. So, restricted exchange Lévi-Strauss would call is harmonic, whereas generalized exchange is disharmonic. The third concept which will help us to understand exchange and alliance approach is symmetrical and asymmetrical exchange. According to Lévi-Strauss, exchange is symmetrical when there is an equal status between the wife giving group and the wife taking group. So, in a exchange which is direct and restricted, where two groups are exchanging women, group 1 gives it to group 2 and takes it back, there is an equal relation between the wife taker and wife giver, because both the groups are wife giver and wife taker at the same time. But in the system of generalized exchange, where one group gives it to the other and the other gives it to the third, there is a kind of asymmetrical or unequal relation between the wife taker and the wife giver, and this Lévi-Strauss calls as asymmetrical exchange. Now, if a kind of Louis Dumas explains the Dravidian kinship by taking forth the understanding of cross-cousin marriage, and he considered affinity as an enduring system through which the continuity from one generation to next occurs. In his study of Tamil color kinship system, Dumas showed that there is a preferential marital rule of cross-cousin. Preferential marriage rule, that is a positive marriage rule, there is a preference to marry cross-cousin. So, there is basically two kind of cross-cousin, which the reference is, that is father's sister's daughter and mother's brother's sister. So, a man would marry either his father's sister's daughter or he would marry mother's brother's daughter, and in the kind of a reciprocal exchange which is restricted and direct, the father's sister's daughter and the mother's brother's daughter are the same. So, basically he tells us about three types of cross-cousin marriage which takes place. The first is direct reciprocity, which is bilateral cross-cousin marriage. It is also known as sister exchange. In bilateral, the second form is delayed reciprocity, which is two form. One is matrilateral cross-cousin marriage and the second is patrilateral cross-cousin marriage. In direct reciprocity or sister exchange, the exchange takes place between two groups and there is a kind of relation alliance established at the first generation, continues in the other two generations. So, we look into the diagrams which we kind of help us to understand the exchange of women in between two groups. And to kind of do a recap, in the lecture on basic terms and concepts, we said that the triangle in a kinship diagram represents a male and a circle represents a female. So, we look into this diagram, we see that the clan A and clan B, if you kind of see, there is a kind of exchange of women. So, the circle which is red is actually marrying the triangle which is shown in blue, and therefore, it is a kind of exchange which is established in the first generation and continues in the second two generation. A form of direct exchange in which two lineage or family established permanent alliances through marriage to each other's women. So, this is bilateral cross cousin marriage. The cross cousin marriage rule is applied in these next two generations. And as I already said, in a bilateral cross cousin marriage, the father's sister's daughter is also the mother's brother's daughter. So, basically in the first generation, which is two individual are exchanging their sisters, the second generation will see the FZD would also be the person who is the MBD, and therefore marriage the person is actually a bilateral cross cousin. The second form of cross cousin is matrilateral cross cousin marriage. In a matrilateral cross cousin marriage, a man marries his mother's brother's daughter, and that is kind of, if you look into it, A gives it to B, B gives it to C, and C in returns gives it to A. Now, this is a harmonic, as the transfer of women remains same in all three generations, and the term which is referred to in terms of explaining the exchange of women is circulating connubium. So, circulating connubium refers to the women who is being exchanged between the groups in a circular motion. The third form of patrilateral cross cousin marriage, where the ego marries the father's sister's daughter. The marriage rule in this case creates a different pattern of exchange than that of the previous generation. So, in a matrilateral cross cousin is a harmonic in which all the direction will remain matrilineal in all three generations, but in a patrilateral cross cousin is disharmonic. Why? Because the pattern of exchange or the direction of exchange of women will change from one generation to the other. And there it is also patrilateral cross cousin is disharmonic, and at the same time it is asymmetrical, because there is a difference in the status between wife givers and wife takers. The wife giver is considered to be at a lower position than the wife taker, and it creates a kind of significance where the women are considered as inferior, and the kind of a subordinate status of women emerges from this. Now, this was the theory of kind of alliance where the exchange of women was considered. Lévi-Strauss theory has been subject to a lot of criticism, and the first criticism of Lévi-Strauss theory is that he considered women as commodity, as something to be exchanged, and this he was trying to, his focus was to understand the structures of the society, but he was trying to do it in terms of binary, where he was kind of understanding the structures, and he saw women as kind of something who could be given from one society the other, without looking into the agency of the women, without looking into kind of whether women was interested in that exchange or not. And therefore, his approach has been termed as very protestal, that is, it was a kind of a male perspective focusing only on the male side of the society. The second criticism is that he uses incest prohibition and exogamy as synonymous in understanding marriage exchange. Rather, his approach is considered as tautological, that is, one would lead to the other. So, he is saying that there is a kind of a difference between nature and culture. Incest avoidance will take us more close to culture, and since we have an incest avoidance rule, it is important that we kind of give our women outside the group. So, if one flows through the other in order to kind of considering incest avoidance and exogamy as synonymous, and also the kind of understanding that where marriage relation and sexuality is also considered as synonymous. The third criticism of Lévi-Strauss is that his understanding of marriage as a system of exchange has been questioned. On one ground, it introduces an analogy between women and the chattel, where women are treated as property to be universally most price valuable. So that is kind of a androcentric bias towards understanding of alliance only through kind of women as being slaves of men, and kind of listening to the idea of the group where they are trying to transfer women from one group to the other. There is neglect of women's agency and does not take into account women's feeling while discussing exchange. Next criticism is that there is a narrow understanding of the concept of exchange limit to one-to-one relation. In reality, exchange can be wide and abstract, happening many groups of people. So kind of his theory seems to be kind of a ideal type of a model, which in reality the practice does not take place. Even the kind of a reciprocity relation is only kind of theorized, but empirical, not found in many society. According to Lévi-Strauss, there is a cyclical relation between prohibition and exogamy and positive marriage. He uses the functionalist perspective to explain the relation between parts and whole. This is only one way of understanding social reality and need not necessarily be true always. So kind of an understanding that the part cannot exist irrespective of the whole is something which has been critiqued and subject to kind of further development. And therefore, we see kind of the alliance theory has been redefined by the work of Rodney Needham. Rodney Needham, he kind of criticizes Lévi-Strauss theory, but at the same time he contributes to kind of rectifying the limitations which were left behind by Lévi-Strauss. Needham, he criticizes Lévi-Strauss on the ground that alliance theory deals only with prescription. Lévi-Strauss was only considered about prescription of preferential marriage partner. He is not talking about the prohibited marriage partner. And prescription can be defined more as a characteristic of simple system than as a symbol of marriage, according to Rodney Needham. It is seen that the relations that are prescribed might not be preferred. For example, in arranged marriage is prescribed, but it is not more preferred by those who go for love marriage. So there is a very thin line between prescribed and preferential marriage partner, and especially when the kind of relations or kind of marriage which is happening around, there are multiple ways in which individual can seek marriage partner, and they do not necessarily follow the rules which is kind of considering as being very specific to culture. There are a lot of society in which marriage rule might overlap. The main development has probably been a refinement of the concept of alliance and the substitution of it with more structural understanding for a more empirical notion. Needham tries to focus on alliance as the empirical group. So if we kind of look into Lévi-Strauss theory, Lévi-Strauss is basically talking about large groups, as he is talking about at the level of clan and lineage. And now where we see kind of size of the society, family kind of has got restricted due to a kind of lot of changes. We need to understand alliance not at a large group level at the clan level, but at the level of smaller groups. As opposed to Lévi-Strauss' understanding of alliance as cyclical, Needham suggests that alliance is dualistic. So Lévi-Strauss is talking about the circulating connubium. There is a relation between group A to B to C and back to A. Needham is telling us that marriage need not necessarily always be cyclical, but it can be between dualistic, that is, it is between two groups. And as in reality, marriage is established, is kind of two groups kind of enter into a relation, and not the third and the fourth group need not necessarily be part of that negotiation. For Needham, the important opposition between the wife giver and wife taker is not necessarily a group activity, because it can take place in smaller groups and not always in large groups like lineage. So, thus according to Nidham, marriage is symbolic in nature. It does not deal alone with sexual relation, prohibition and prescription, but also with caste purity, recruitment of caste and political significance. So, if we kind of understand alliance or we kind of as something which is kind of dependent on marriage rule, we see that it is very important to understand that marriage we need not always be understood from a biological perspective. There are different ways in which marriage can be understood. Marriage in the conventional understanding was kind of a sexual union between a man and a woman for the purpose of procreation. But even when many cases we will see that this definition or the conventional definition of marriage is not very true. The Nair example will give us a clear case study where marriage is not necessarily a sexual union between a man and a woman for the procreation of the purpose. And now in the kind of new kinship studies which we will do in the coming lectures, we will see how marriage moves outside the biological understanding. For instance, if the kind of in vitro fertilization where the sperms and the eggs are fertilized in the laboratory, the relation that the child has with the doctor, with the nurses, with the other kind of people are outside the biological relation. So, to come into an understanding that marriage first is not necessarily or restricted to exchange of women, and second that marriage does not be understood through a singular understanding of a sexual union between man and women, and third, it is very important to understand that sexual union and marriage are not necessarily synonymous. So, to keep this in mind, which kind of help us that marriage will help us understand kinship relation, but we need to elaborate or we kind of developed on the theory that Lévi-Strauss has given to us. Lévi-Strauss alliance approach help us to only understand how preferential marriage partner or cross cousin marriage rules existed in society. So kind of this we come to an end to the lecture on alliance approach. Thank you.